Dinosaur, written by Stephen Llewelyn and performed by Chris Barrie. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell to keep up to date with the latest installments.
The dig team were reaching the limits of endurance. Some suffered more than others as rain lashed and fatigue gnawed at them. Despite the warm climate, they were soaked through to the skin, and the ferocity of the wind was freezing them. Beckett had lost his grip some time ago, his energy completely drained. A couple of construction workers held on to him courageously, but the effort was sapping their remaining strength as well. Natalie faced the realization that with no end in sight, she could hold on no longer. Her hands began to slip. The Sarge saw that she was in trouble and reached for her, losing his own grip in the process. The wind claimed them like a momentary buoyancy at first, lifting them gently off the ground. They waited for the violent tug, certain the end was upon them, when incredibly, it was all over. As quickly as they were lifted, they were discarded, both sagging into a surreal calm. Dropping just a few inches onto the wet earth, they were left cramped and panting. The effect around them was virtually instantaneous, as if a huge fan had been unplugged. The trees straightened, their limbs creaking back to natural positions, and there was localized silence. The sudden tranquility disturbed only by the drip-drip of water from the leaves above them. Within moments, the roar of the hurricane sounded far off, leaving behind a primal freshness and a smell not dissimilar to freshly mown grass. The team's arms and legs were locked into position around the anchor points they had found. They were so stiff that it took a while for them to release their grip. Gradually, they experimented with movement, eventually managing to stand and congratulate one another on their survival. There were even a few hoots of laughter as people found themselves alive against all odds. Natalie waved them down. "We must be quiet," she hissed, little more than a whisper, but just loud enough to make it through the group. "Any animals that have remained in the locale will also be coming back to their senses. They'll be scared and they'll be angry, and we don't want to attract their attention, especially as we've lost our protection. Do any of you still have your weapons?" The Sarge and two others had retained their rifles, but the other weapons had clearly disappeared off and beyond. He gave the weaponless men and women a look of disappointment and reproof, but didn't want to come down too hard on them. The recent emergencies had forced them to extend their security contingent once more. Many of the new recruits were ex- or non-combat military, but even so, their field experience was patchy and variable. However, they were willing to stand up and be counted, so Major White had accepted them into the fold gratefully, if a little reluctantly, as a sort of home guard. Before the Sarge was able to say anything, a deafening roar split the air. Looking up in surprise, he felt a surge of relief. Hovering above them against all hope was the shuttle, with the cradle already on its way down. Jackson was not a man usually given to emotional display or lyricism, but at that moment it seemed like the most beautiful thing he had ever seen or heard in his life. His radio crackled with a man's voice. "Sarge, send 'em up 5 at a time as quickly as you can. We'll have to chance the extra weight." The Sarge could see the man mouthing the words above him, could see the urgency in his expression. He wasted no time on questions and simply pushed the first 5 onto the cradle immediately. Once the first team were on their way up, he radioed back. "I take it we're fighting the clock?" "Yes, Sarge," the man replied from the belly hatch above. "We're in the eye of the storm. Any minute now, all hell's gonna break loose again, and if it catches the shuttle, we'll all be landowners." "Understood," the Sarge answered, as he watched the cradle deposit its first load of passengers to begin another agonizingly slow descent. "Come on," he muttered under his breath. The second team jumped quickly aboard, and the hoist repeated the operation. Only the Sarge and 3 others remained now. Of the 3, 2 had retained their weapons, which automatically qualified them for the worst job, that of watching everyone's back before getting to safety themselves. The Sarge observed them, eyeing one another cynically. Clearly they had worked this out for themselves. "Sorry, fellas, this is the reward for showing competence," he said with a wink to demonstrate his confidence in them. The cradle descended for the final time. Not waiting for it to land, the Sarge hustled his men aboard as soon as it reached chest height. Taking a last 360 view of the glade, he satisfied himself that nothing was poised to pounce before jumping up after them. They were almost up to the winch when the storm returned. It struck the little ship like a hammer blow, batting it sideways before the pilot could mount any kind of defence to counter the colossal forces working against him. "Hang on!" the Sarge screamed at his men as they drew within 2 meters of the ship. The crew in the cargo hatch leaned out courageously, straining against their harnesses with arms outstretched to help. The wind was deafening as debris flew at them and around them once more. The shuttle bucked like a wild bull, sending the cradle flailing violently. The vibration and brutality of the movement caused one of its 4 steel cables to snap free. It whipped one of the Sarge's men fully across the chest, breaking his grip. He was out cold, and would have certainly been thrown to his death were it not for his flak jacket. One of the men reaching from the shuttle caught its straps in an iron grip, tearing his own shoulder. Nevertheless, he held on to the unconscious man, screaming, "Help me!" as the very live dead weight flew around like a rag doll. The cradle snapped and spun through crazy angles on its 3 remaining tethers, caught in a micro maelstrom between storm and ship. The 3 conscious men hung on to a tether each, with every ounce of determination left to them. Just a few more seconds would see them within reach of help, but they would feel every passing fractal of those terrifying seconds before welcome hands dragged them up through the hatch. 1,000. The most savage gust yet twisted the cradle upside down, spilling all 3 men. They hung from their cables desperately, 2 of them one-handed. With almost superhuman will, they caught themselves, just as the wind changed direction, throwing their legs out horizontally. The Sarge felt the impact of a boot in the face. Had he not focused every ounce of his being on keeping his hands tight around the cable, the shock might have sent him twisting and thrashing into the maw of the mini-cyclone which had spun their platform. 1,000. The cradle slammed downwards, snapping hard against its ties, further stressing them as it spun the 3 men around. The Sarge and 1 other landed back in the cradle, screaming against fate and tortured tendons. The 3rd man was hit by the cradle's handrail as it flipped back violently. He closed his eyes as blood streamed down his face, unable to do anything more than close a fist tight around the cable to which he clung for his life. 1,000. The unconscious man flipped almost 180 degrees, making his rescuer scream in torment as he slammed headfirst into the Sarge, who heard more than felt the sickening crack, so focused was he on his grip. Had they been bareheaded, both men's skulls would have split wide open. Consciousness was beginning to fade, the 3 men outside in the storm simply having little more to give. Courage had brought them this far, but hope was failing them. 1,000. The wind and buffeting seemed to weaken. The Sarge knew this had to be subjective. He had stared death in the face more than once and recognized the calm. After the last few hours, it came as something of a relief. So this is it, he thought. He could sense rather than feel himself being pulled from pillar to post. It was like movement described rather than experienced. I expected there to be more pain. The words formed themselves in his mind, which despite everything seemed to be working at light speed, although he wasn't exactly sure who I was anymore. 1,000. Noise returned, the howling of a hurricane, the screams of the injured, and he was back in the middle of it. "Oh, Turkish delight," he said, realizing that the pulling and tugging he was experiencing was not the storm tearing him apart, it was the rescue team dragging him bodily into the shuttle. The man with the torn shoulder had blacked out from pain, but not before the last of the soldiers had been saved and the cradle cut free from the winch. 1,000. Fully awake and very much alive, the Sarge saw it glance off the side of the shuttle, rocketing away down the valley with all the other flying debris as the belly hatch closed. In those last moments, the pressure increased around the closing doors, turning the roar of the wind into an ear-splitting shriek. "Get us out of here!" he screamed above it all. Singh, didn't need the radio. He could hear the sounds of a bad situation and the shouts for help from below with his own ears. Fully committed to preventing the ship from crashing into the forest or the side of the valley below, his concentration was absolute, so Douglas toggled the ship's intercom. "Get everyone strapped down immediately. Repeat, immediately. We have to leave now." Singh gave them 20 seconds to comply, barely avoiding disaster 3 times in that short window. "It's now or never, Captain." "Do it!" Douglas shouted. "Here we go!" Singh called. He pointed the little ship back towards the eye of the storm, pouring on the power. Flying with the wind, rather than battling to remain stationary against it, took some of the anger out of the fight, but the buffeting was still teeth-rattling. The wind speeds were now in excess of 300 kilometers per hour, and time appeared to dilate for everyone on board as they hunkered down, completely powerless to do anything but place all their faith in the one man who could save them. Singh let out an involuntary primal scream as the storm spat the remains of their own cradle back at them once more. It came out of nowhere, from his right. Before he could even gather his wits, muscle memory and instinct had already pushed the stick forward, taking the shuttle down steeply, allowing the crumpled steel frame to fly across his field of vision, diagonally up and left, missing the shuttle's nose by the thickness of a paint job. He heard screams from the passenger compartment behind, but could pay them no heed as he fought the vicious currents determined to smash them into the ground. He pulled up, hearing something heavy clang off the hull. The shuttle responded sluggishly against the awesome power ranged against it, and for a moment he thought they had taken damage. Before he could contemplate what the collision with the unknown object may have broken, the whole ship jumped wildly to the left with bone-jarring ferocity. Singh almost blacked out from the sudden lateral G-forces, and before he knew it, he was fighting his own oversteer, because the shuttle had popped out of the black Hadesian sky into brilliant blue clarity and calm. They were once more in the eye. He didn't waste any time on the view, but pointed the ship straight up towards space, praying their recent maneuvers hadn't smeared any of his passengers across the bulkheads. Bain's heart alternated between her mouth and her shoes. She had no way of getting a signal through the storm. She could only wait and hope. Just minutes after the shuttle left, black storm replaced blue sky once more. She watched the hurricane reassert control through the bridge viewports. It happened so fast, it felt like being buried. She brooded. Presently, the doors to the bridge chimed. Activating the screen on her console, she saw Mother Sarah waiting in the corridor outside. She opened the doors, allowing Sarah to enter, and was pleasantly surprised to see Mary Hutchins follow with her trolley in tow. And behind her, a furry presence capable of banishing almost any frown. "We thought you could use some quality company," said the priest. Reaver, despite his wildly oscillating rear, somehow made a beeline for Baines. His wag began somewhere near the base of his rib cage and surged all through his hind quarters before arriving at last at the tip of his tail. "Reaver!" Baines cried, kneeling down and pulling him into a hug. "Tim suggested I bring him along," explained Mary. "He thought as you both have people you care about out there, you might like to wait it out together. Do you mind?" "No," replied Baines, smiling, her eyes bright with moisture. "I don't mind at all. Please thank Tim for his kindness if you see him before I do. I know how much he loves spending time with Reaver. It's just a pity about the circumstances." "I assume you won't mind the medicinal coffee and chocolate truffles we bought either?" asked Sarah. The shuttle soon left the troposphere behind. Safe from the storm, it headed on up through the stratosphere. At the top of the stratosphere, with 95% of the Earth's atmosphere behind it, the little ship powered on through the mesosphere and the mesopause. From here on, up into the thermosphere, the temperature on the hull actually increased slightly, as it began to absorb almost direct radiation from the sun. All buffeting and wind noise forgotten in the silence of space. Singh stayed on the power, breaking the immediate hold of Earth's gravity and flying into a geosynchronous orbit, a little over 22,000 miles above the surface of the planet. Once at pace with the location of the new world below, he programmed the autopilot. The colossal speed required, due to the angular momentum created by the distance between the shuttle and the mothership down on the surface, was astonishing. And yet in the black velvet of space, it was as if they, and the planet spinning beneath them, were barely moving at all. Douglas unstrapped from his seat and shot aft to check on everyone. As he ran through the passenger area towards the cargo hold, he was relieved to see all crew and evacuees strapped down in some fashion or other. Every member of the rescue dig team was a mess of cuts and bruises, still shivering from the storm or shock or both. Despite this, they were clearly very happy to be alive. As Douglas passed Thomas Beckett, still strapped into a passenger seat, the historian caught his sleeve, saying,
"Thank you for saving our lives, Captain."
"You're welcome, Mr. Beckett," replied Douglas.
"However, I knew as a boy that I didn't want to be an archaeologist, and you have most definitely failed to change my mind on the subject."
Douglas was a little put out at first, but gradually it dawned on him that this was probably a fair point. He cracked an exasperated smile. "Well, I dare say that reading the history we are creating here could be," he searched for a euphemism, "entertaining. Living through it is a whole different kettle of fish. From here onwards, may you live in boring times, Mr. Beckett."
"Likewise, Captain,"
replied the historian, with a battered, tired smile.
"And, Captain, thank you for coming for us."
Douglas nodded and continued through to the cargo hold. As soon as Dr. Flanagan saw Douglas, he released his own harness and jumped up to examine the unconscious soldier who had been whipped by the cable. The man was still out, but his vitals were strong. He turned to the crewman with the dislocated shoulder, who had come round during their flight and was whimpering as bravely as he could. "That was a hell of a thing you did back there, son. You definitely saved that guy's life," he said. The man just nodded through gritted teeth. "Hold him, James," said Flanagan, roping Douglas into helping. "This is going to hurt a lot, son. I'll count down from 5. Brace yourself." Flanagan shoved the shoulder back into its socket on 3. It was an old trick, and it caused the man to cry out in shock, allowing some of the pain to sneak under the radar. The injured winch operator sagged back against the hull of the ship, the sweat of agony pouring down his face. "You okay?" asked Flanagan. The young man just nodded, breathing hard. "I'll give you something for the pain." The doctor pulled a syringe and a small bottle from his bag. After giving the injection, he manufactured a sling for the man's arm from some ubiquitous medical cotton sheet. Content he had done all he could for him for now, he moved on to the injured soldier who was still unconscious. Flanagan checked him over as best he could. "He's got 2 or 3 cracked ribs." He looked up at Douglas. "You'll know about those tomorrow, but I think the blow just knocked the wind and probably everything else out of him." He grinned, reaching for his smelling salts. He brought the man round, making sure he was fully conscious and otherwise okay before administering anything for the pain. He checked for pupil responses, whilst explaining how the young man opposite had reached out of the ship, plucking the soldier from certain death with a miraculous catch. The story helped take the injured man's mind off the pain, and he insisted on thanking his heroic rescuer before the mild sedative took him irresistibly back to sleep, a natural sleep this time. "How are you holding up, Dave?" asked Douglas. "The last time I saw you, you didn't look much better than these guys." He gestured towards the injured men. "Ah, that was then," said Flanagan, brushing the captain's concern away. "James, I need to talk to you after I've cleaned up all these cuts and scratches." Douglas nodded his assent. Whilst Flanagan did his rounds, Douglas worked with the shuttle crew to hand out blankets and dry fatigues for everyone. "I'm afraid there wasn't time to worry about getting shoes from your quarters," he said to the group at large. "You'll just have to put your boots by the air circulators to dry them and wander around in your stocking feet for the day. At least that'll save my carpets, looking at the state of you all." "You don't want these beauties near the air resoc, mate," said the Australian construction worker. Raucous assent from his co-workers filled the cabin, attesting the point. Douglas smiled at their spirit, despite everything. Well, maybe you could wait till we get back and hang him outside, laddie, he said. After a few minutes, Flanagan sought Douglas out once more, speaking quietly. I'm going to need some help, James. Douglas nodded agreement. Aye, in a place as dangerous as this, one doctor's no enough. Heidi was a brilliant surgeon too. Better than me in that regard, if I'm honest, said Flanagan. I need to replace her by training someone else. Who'd you have in mind? Asked Douglas. Flanagan glanced over to where Natalie sat, looking tired and bruised. He nodded for Douglas to follow him as he approached her. How are you feeling, Natalie? He asked. Oh, I'll live. She smiled wearily up at them. Thanks to all of you. Actually, most of the credit goes to Lieutenant Singh, said Douglas. It was his idea which allowed us to pull you out of there, and his extraordinary, if daredevil, flying that saved our lives just now. Tell him I owe him a... She thought for a second. Whatever that Indian lager is that he likes. She smiled again. Natalie, said Flanagan, kneeling down to sit with her. I need to talk to you about something. Oh, this isn't about the mess my hair's in, is it? No. Flanagan chuckled and then frowned. Since we... He paused uncomfortably. Since we lost Dr. Schultz, I'm concerned that I may not be able to keep up with the medical needs of the crew, especially as we're in such a dangerous predicament. Natalie nodded. Are you going to give Justin extra training? She asked. Yeah, he admitted. The kid didn't want to be a doctor, but it looks like I'm going to have to force the issue. Unfortunately, that's going to take time, even though he's a great nurse and a great student. What I'm most concerned about is this. If something were to happen to me, it could leave everyone in a mess the next time we get an emergency. Hell, I might need a physician myself. And emergencies have been a regular part of our daily routine just lately, Douglas added. Indeed, Flanagan agreed. Now, I've been doing some digging through people's files over the last few days, while I've been feeling sorry for myself in sickbay, he added with chagrin. There are one or two biologists among Doc Norris's team who have appropriate knowledge, and I will be talking to them as soon as I can. Trouble is, though, they've no surgical experience to speak of. Maybe a few animal autopsies, but... He shrugged. But? Asked Natalie, smelling a trap. Well, yeah, Flanagan acknowledged, busted. I couldn't help noticing on your record that you have considerable experience with surgical procedures. Veterinary procedures? Natalie exclaimed, wide-eyed. I've never treated a person. Surely we're all just mammals, said Douglas. And I'm sure Mother Sarah would tell you that we're all God's creatures, too. Absolutely, said Natalie. And if you had a rabbit with a trichobosaur or a myopathic horse, I'd be happy to render any assistance I could. But operating on people... What can I say? I need all the help I can get, and you're it, Flanagan affirmed. Look, I'm not talking about leaving you to sink or swim. I just need you to work with me. You have the closest skill set to what I need for a surgeon, but I'll have to train others too. Will you help? Natalie put her head in her hands, exhaling loudly. Of course I'll help, she said quietly. I suppose if everyone's going to have to work at least 2 jobs, it'll feel more like home anyway. She gave Flanagan a sideways glance. I hope your department has great insurance cover. Don't sweat it. We should be safe from malpractice lawyers here, he replied with a wink. I hope. Douglas raised an eyebrow. Clearly you haven't spent much time with Mr. Bernstein. Anyway, I'll give you doctors some space to discuss the details. He stood to leave, and then changed his mind. Natalie, he said, I've been meaning to ask you about the skeleton of Audrey Jansen. Yes, Captain? Douglas frowned in puzzlement. It's just that Arnold's skeleton was near the surface when we discovered him. If they died together, shouldn't they have been at the same... He sought for the word. Same level? In the stone, I mean. You're quite right, Captain, replied Natalie. Technically they were. The mudstone buried them together at the same time. The stratigraphy leaves us in no doubt about that. As the sediments were laid down over the millions of years since their passing, the mud and sand turned to stone, and that stone was subject to ground heave at some point. In fact, that may very well be a process which is still ongoing, albeit geologically slowly, literally. In a nutshell, what we discovered was a stratigraphy canted over by about 30 degrees. The stone and soil, etc. we cleared to reach Audrey was all laid down after whatever incident overtook them both. The stone and strata surrounding the remains of Captain Bessel were simply eroded off the top as the landscape changed.
So it's certain we're only dealing with one incident. They definitely died together, clarified Douglas.
As certain as we can be. It's highly likely they were both laid down and stratified within a very short window. The fact that some of the bones were slightly disarticulated and mixed up makes it entirely possible they went together, perhaps even sharing the same fate. Natalie's scientific interest in the puzzle left her feeling slightly guilty as she remembered these long-dead individuals were actually the captain's friends. People he may well have been sharing a drink and a chat with just a few weeks ago. "Sorry, Captain," she felt the need to add.
He smiled sadly at her. "I can understand the fascination, Natalie," he allowed. "It's a remarkable story. I'm just a little too close to it."
He nodded to the doctors and made his way back to the shuttle's small bridge. Lieutenant Sandeep Singh was lost in a study of impossible perspective as he looked down upon the Earth. He loved this view of home from orbit, although of course this Earth was not the home of his childhood. All the continents were just a little off, but there were certainly recognizable patterns. India was still thousands of miles south of the rest of Asia, but nowhere near as far from home as one of her sons. Despite the beauty and awe, a twinge of homesickness clutched at his heart. He missed Fang, too, and hoped she had been taken in by one of his cat-loving friends back at Canaveral. He pulled away from his sorrows, deciding it was best to focus on just how lucky he was to see such things. What always amazed him was just how big a planet was. There was nowhere you could place yourself to adequately understand its size. From space, they were just perfect circles of this colour or that, almost abstract. Of course, were he any closer, he would be down upon it, which would provide no perspective at all. He decided his favourite view was from here, from orbit. Maybe it was the vibrant blues and greens, dusted with white caps and draped with clouds, all beautifully lit against the starscape beyond. Or perhaps it was the way the sphere's majestic curve disappeared just around the corner, forever, no matter how hard you chased it. Truly a God's eye view, though even this couldn't fully reveal the scale. After all, when a mountain becomes so small it can barely be singled out, what does one measure against? Completely lost, Lieutenant Singh sighed in exquisite agony. Thoughts as far away as his home, he linked his hands behind his head and leaned back contentedly.
"Everything okay, Sandy?"
asked Douglas. Singh jumped, so markedly that playing cool was never an option. Douglas chuckled.
"Sorry, laddie. Did I surprise you?"
"I was away with the angels, Captain," the pilot replied ruefully, before a frown of concern crossed his face. "Is everyone okay back there?"
"Aye, nothing that won't mend,
and it's all thanks to you. Well done, Lieutenant, really." Douglas patted the younger officer companionably on the shoulder. "We were lucky, sir."
"Well, we knew the plan was dangerous, but we were desperate," Douglas acknowledged. "All those people back there owe you their lives, and that's a fact. I doubt that any of them would have survived that storm much longer without shelter or protection. But most importantly, we made it."
He took a long look out of the viewport before continuing.
"We didn't get the chance to take this in when we arrived last week. I've absolute faith in you as a pilot, Sandy. Never doubt that. But the speed we came in..."
He shook his head, whistling softly.
"I've got to admit it, I thought we'd had it. I can't believe it was just last week."
"I know," Singh agreed, gesturing towards the Earth. "We were only heading away from her a fortnight ago. Everything fine, just another day in the office."
"Aye, and the speed that hurricane came in, knocking everything sideways, was like an allegory for what happened next, and since," Douglas remarked, frowning. That weather system really caught us with our trousers around our ankles today. We must get that satellite up here. Pity we haven't got it on board now, in fact. They lapsed into a thoughtful, companionable silence, each lost in the view for a moment before Douglas continued, "Aye, there's nothing for it. We'll have to come back up here again." Singh caught Douglas's reflection in the viewport. "Oh no," he replied, deadpan. They both laughed, forcing their recent stress and fear to recede a little. "It's beautiful. Home but not home," remarked Douglas. "Maybe we should let others come up here with the satellite. Give someone else the chance to see those wonders, eh? What do you think?" Singh continued to laugh quietly. "With respect, Captain, I disagree."
Dinosaur, written by Stephen Llewelyn and performed by Chris Barrie. New installments uploaded each week. Subscribe for more. Visit the link in the description for free New World companion stories, available for download as ebooks.